Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be doing Black Cake Season 1 Episode 2, and this episode is entitled Coventina. I just want to start off by saying I am enjoying watching Black Cake so far, and the story is very interesting. And so let's jump right into Episode 2. So we start off and they're back at the house. They're talking to the lawyer friend. Associate, friend, I don't know. They're talking to him, and you can tell that Byron is upset about the information that he's just found out. Byron is upset. The sister is not. The sister's name is Benedetta. Where did they get that from? Was their father's name Benny? I don't know. But the sister's name is Benedetta, and she is excited to learn more information about her mother. She's like, oh, we're half, or not half, but we're a little bit Chinese. Like, this is very interesting to learn that our mother is not perfect. Because Byron stands up and he's like, I can't do this, da, 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 which is very interesting because it seems like he was the closest one to their mother. So the fact that he's like, oh, I don't want to go on, it was just kind of weird, but not weird, but I understand it's probably like, this is not the mother that I knew, and I don't know how I would feel if I were in his shoes. So yeah, she's happy, he's not. The mom on the tape actually says, hey, I need a break, because she's about to go into her London phase and explain to them like her life in London. And I completely understand her being like, I need a break from talking about this, especially she's getting towards the end of her life. So I don't know if she was like in pain, tired, I don't know how she felt. But anyway, she tells him that like, I need a break. So Byron takes this opportunity to take a break as well, and he goes to work. And he basically tells his sister, like, I've been waiting on this promotion for almost a decade. I need to go see if they made a decision. And she's like, oh, work can wait, da da da. He's like, no, like, I've been waiting. So he goes into work. The boss tells him like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. He's like, and then Byron thanks him for giving him flower, or for sending flowers. So I assume this is after the funeral. I don't know. Or maybe not. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out where they are in the process of grieving. But anyway, he thanks him for the flowers, and then the other candidate for the job comes in and sits down. The candidate's like, oh, you're selling a pipe dream, telling these kids that they can be on TV because they're in ocean sciences. And Byron's like, no, it's not a pipe dream. Like, there's a reality, or there's a possibility out there. The boss tells Byron that they're going to go ahead and give the job to the other guy. And they were like, oh, it was a unanimous decision. And I was like, wow, like, he really wasted his time coming out here, which I found weird. While he's having this conversation with his boss and he's at work, the daughter, or the Benedetta, is having a conversation with the lawyer, and she left home like 8 years ago during Thanksgiving, and she was looking for her cup that her mom gave her right before she went off to college to have some milk and tea. The lawyer tells her that he had to move some things around for her mother, which made me interested to know, which made me more interested in him, because I'm like, why is he in the house moving things around? That's like, I don't know. I'm not saying anything. But I was just like, that's very interesting that you're like moving things around for her, and why couldn't Byron do it? But anyway, he says towards the end he had to move some things around, and he moved the tin milk down there so where she could like easily pick it up. So he gives her the tin milk. She makes some tea. They chat a little bit about like her YouTube channel, and he also tells her that, I think you inspired your mother to make these recordings and tell y'all her story. And so I feel like that whole conversation kind of made her sad. He also tells her like, you have a great voice. He subscribed to her YouTube channel. I thought that was funny. And then I believe he leaves because she asks him a question. She says, oh, is this the only reason why you're here? Like, the fact that this is a job. And he's like, I think it's time for me to go. When Byron is ready to listen to the rest of the recordings, let me know. I'll call me at any time. Like, I'll come. So he leaves, and when he leaves, she walks into her mother's room. She looks at some pictures. You could tell that she's sad that she has missed the last moment or chance that she had with her mother. And she plays a recording of her mother telling her or asking her to come home. And then she starts crying. So then we come to the end of those scenes, and then we're back on to, or we come back and Byron comes back to the house. He tells his sister that he's called Mr. Mitch and they're gonna finish the recordings out. So she asks him like, oh, should I start calling you boss now? And he's like, they haven't made a decision yet. I want to know why he didn't tell her that he, I want to know why he didn't tell her that he did not get the job, the position. But I guess we'll find that out later. He says he needs a drink, and then Mr. Mitch comes back. So once Mr. Mitch comes back, he puts on the recording, and the first thing the mom says is that, I'm sorry that I had to take a break. And then she goes into her being in London. So we're back in London, and you see her roommate explains to her how to get to work, and she's like, oh, don't be nervous, everything will be fine. She gives her these directions very, very quickly. Like, I would not have picked that up that quickly. But anyways, she jumps on a bus. I'm thinking that they were going together, but no. The girl jumps on a bus. We find out later that she's in school, and Ellen, or Covey, I don't even know what to call this lady. Our main character, Covey, goes to the nanny's house. So they are at the nanny's house, and she says, I'm sorry that I'm late. It's also raining, and Eleanor asks her where her boots are, and she's like, oh, I packed in a rush, because she told Eleanor that she's from the mountains, which wouldn't make sense, because then maybe it was raining all the time, or maybe she should have boots. I don't know. Anyway, they go to the house where she's going to be nannying, being a nanny, and she is introduced to the wife of the house and who's in charge of her. And she tells her like, oh, I'm sorry that I'm late, and X, Y, and Z, some other stuff. And the nanny's like, oh, you know, that's fine, get on in here. But the first thing she says, which threw me off, well, it shouldn't have because of the time period, but she's like, hey, you're fresh off the boat, aren't you? And I was like, who starts a conversation off like that? But anyway, she's like, oh, we usually get more seasoned girls, or whatever that means. So she comes inside, she introduces her to the children, and after she introduces her to the children, she says she starts to feel like more home or whatever. She also introduces her to, well, not introduces her, I think she just tells her like, oh, we have, I guess that's the maid. I think her name is Jen. And then she said the lady who she's nannying for says that me and my husband are forward thinkers. And I was like, because you have an Asian maid and a black nanny? Like, the time period is wild. But anyway, so yeah, she says that. I was like, that's crazy for her to think. And then yeah, we go into her, she's going through her everyday thing, I guess. She goes back to the boarding house, and there's these girls there, and one of them is like, hey, come to the docks with us. And she's like, who's at the docks? Well, she says, first of all, my name's Tina, and who's at the docks? And she's like, oh, just random people, like, we're the welcome party. And she's like, oh, well, no, like, I'm good. And she doesn't go. I was like, I thought that was not strange. I know that they're probably just trying to get to know her, but I thought it weird that she would just be like, oh, just come to the docks, like, we don't know who's gonna be there. And I was like, what is this? Like, I don't know. I personally, like, unless you know somebody who's gonna be there, like, why would you go? But it seems like they're the type of girls who just, like, you know, they want to be in the know, like, who's here, who's not here, who's back home, who's doing what type thing. So yeah. Okay, so after she declines the invitation to go to the docks with the girls, she basically just says, like, in the voiceover, she's like, I wanted to explore London, but the fact that Little Man's brothers could be out there lurking, waiting to get her, she just doesn't feel comfortable going here and there. And also the fact that Pearl had gave her a note, you know, warning her to stay away from crowds and things like that. So she was like, going to the docks is a no-go because that's a huge crowd and she could be recognized. And she was also like, She's feeling, you could tell she's feeling very lonely. She pretty much just goes in her room, sits there. She doesn't do much. One day she decides to make some Chinese soup for the kids that she's nannying for, and they hate the soup. And the maid actually tastes the soup, and she's like, she looks at her, she's like, this is Chinese soup. And she's like, how do you know how to make it, basically? And Covey tells her that I had a neighbor back home that taught it to me or something like that. She feels bad after the children didn't like it. I don't know why she felt bad. They're kids. They're used to eating the same things. Like, kids don't really like, they like what they like. You know what I'm saying? But she took that to heart. And I feel like that made her feel bad. She goes back home to the boarding house, and this is like one night where she's like crying into the pillow, and she finally has a conversation with Ellie, and she opens up to her a little bit about the situation that she is in. And she's like, Ellie tells her that she's an orphan, and this is where the whole orphan story originated from. I also wanted to mention that it's important to note that she did ride up to the university to see Gibbs one day, but she gets scared and she doesn't go through with it. She turns around. So while she's having this conversation with Ellie, Ellie basically tells her that it's going to take some getting used to make it a home here, and it's going to take a while. And while she's in the process of telling her, like, Ellie is an orphan, she shows her some cockle shells, and she was like, oh, where'd you get these cockle shells from? She's like, the orphanage was so far from the ocean, but I was able to dig these shells up. And she also explains that the nursing program that she's in is not what she thought it was, and she pretty much spends her time cleaning commodes and like cleaning up after people, and it's not like what she thought she would be doing. And she feels like she wants to get her geology degree, which is why she was so interested in the cockle shells, or it was like a first love of hers when she was a child. She says she doesn't like to talk about the fact that she's an orphan, which, yeah, I don't know why you would. In that conversation, she decides to show Ellie her mother's necklace, which was, like I said, a big step for Covey at that time because she hadn't really opened up to anybody. Afterwards, you see they're at a party. She decides to make a cake for Ellie, and I believe it was like, oh, she was graduating, so she made the cake. At the party, the one girl who asked her to go to the docks introduces her to a guy. She stumbles through the conversation awkwardly. You can tell that she's lying. I feel like as a watcher you can tell that she's lying. I don't know if the guy can, but the girl takes her aside and she's like, why are you lying? And she says that he's not the type of guy she would go for, which, I mean, that could obviously be true. We don't know. We've only seen her with Gibbs. And the girl is like, yeah, but it's like something else. Like, she's trying to get to the root of Coventina. But Coventina is not going to budge. She's not going to say anything. And this is when I feel like Covey makes up her mind that she's going to have to leave, because if she doesn't, she's eventually going to get found out. Ellie eventually saves her from the girl and takes her away. And the girl was basically just trying to tell her, like, hey, this guy could help you make England a home like, you know, Jamaica was. But like I said, that conversation had Covey like all mixed up and confused. So she takes Covey away. Eleanor takes Covey away. They start dancing, and I believe that Ellie stumbles in that night, and it's late. And this is when she comes up with the grand plan, right? She's like, hey, let's leave. Let's leave England. Let's go to that college that you want to go to in Scotland because it's your dream, and study geology like you want to do. Like, we have enough money saved up. We can do this together. And Ellie at first is like, no, like, I think it's a bad idea, but she eventually goes along with it, which I thought was kind of crazy. Next thing you know, they're in the train, and they're on the train. They're drinking tea, And Ellie actually took some tin milk from the boarding house. They pour the tin milk in. The train attendant walks by. I think he pours the tea. When you see them pouring the tin milk, then they're like, oh, we'll bring in the new year with our new lives. They're about to toast. I think they're about to toast, or they did toast, and they like drink a sip. And that's when you see the plane crash. Or the plane crash. That's when you see the train crash. And the tea just goes crazy. You see them like get all jumbled up and everything. And this takes us back to the island. On the island, we see that they have a funeral for Covey. There's Bunny, there's Pearl, and we have Lynn. We see a little bit of Lynn's backstory, his parents, him being raised on the island in the shop, and we also see where the gambling problem started and how his mom gave him some money to go get something specific, but he comes back and he has like, oh, it was a fish head for soup. His mom told him to go get fish head for soup. He comes back with the whole fish and some other stuff that he like won. The dad kind of looks like, that doesn't look good. Like, you shouldn't be doing that. And the mom is like, oh, thank you, my baby. Like, we're going to eat like a king. Or he's going to eat like a king. And yeah, that's when the gambling problem started for him. You also see him get introduced to Covey's mother and how she came into the shop. She didn't have enough money for some specific items. He was like, you know, very enthralled with her. Like, it was almost like, it looked like love at first sight. So he's like very, very interested in her. She says like, don't patronize me. Like, I got enough money, whatever, whatever. And she tells him like, oh, you have flour in your hair. She knocks it out of his hair. And then you see the mom tell her son like, oh, don't be messing with that racial slur word, whatever it is. She uses that again. And he doesn't listen to her. The next scene, you see them like dancing together, and you see little Covey right there. And she's going through on the voiceover, she's like, oh, he always did what he had to do for us, da da da. And you also see Bunny struggle with the fact that Covey is no longer there. Her father is like asking her what can he do to help, and he also tells her about a gentleman that's a coach, and like she should possibly get involved with this person. And she's like, are you setting me up on a date, or are you setting me up to swim? Because I want to swim. She's obviously crying. She's upset. This is like after the funeral. And yeah, they're all struggling through it, you know. So also at the funeral, after the funeral, the police comes up to Lynn and tells him that, well, Lynn first says that the case should be closed, like my daughter's dead. And the police is like, no, somebody helped her off the island. She's using her mother's maiden name. And so that's when maybe Lynn is like, oh, well, she just left me. Like, he probably feels bad, like, oh, my daughter just left me like that. But I don't know why he would feel bad when you literally married her off to this man and it was like the worst decision ever. So you also see Lynn, he is at the store this must be after the funeral, and Little Man's brothers come to beat him up and push him out of the store. And he looks up at the store and he's like, wow, like, how did I get to where I am? And it's like, I feel like it's because of what happened in his childhood. Like, his parents maybe didn't tell him like, hey, you need to stop doing this. It's a bad habit. It's not something you need to be involved in. And he never stopped. And so that's why you are where you are. And she also says that in the voiceover, like, we make these decisions and we end up at different places in life and we wonder how we got here. And it's like step by step. You know what I'm saying? So then we also have the flashback of Lynn going through his life, but you also see the point where Little Man asks for Covey, and Lynn basically tries to talk him down, like, oh, Covey's got a mouth on her, and then he's like, oh, that makes a great wife or something like that. He says that if you don't arrange the marriage, then I'll arrange the marriage myself, because it was basically a way for him to erase all his debts. So I feel like he didn't have another option because he was so deep in debt. he was like, he pretty much had to do what he did. So the last part of the episode is where Lynn is feeling regretful about marrying his daughter off. He goes in the pantry. We see Pearl come in. She comes to get him, and she's like, no, you can't act like this at the wedding. You made this decision. You decided to do this, so you need to be out here and you need to be seen for people to see you. Like, this looks bad. So when Pearl comes back to get him, they go back out to the reception floor, and that's when little man drops to the floor. He starts foaming at the mouth. You also see right before that moment, you see Gibbs. Now, how was Gibbs there? I don't know if that was like a figment of his imagination or Gibbs was really there. Obviously, we got to keep watching. But you see Gibbs there, which I was like, okay, so he stayed for a little while longer than he should have. Maybe because he wanted to actually see if this marriage was going to go through or not. We also realized at this point that everyone thought that Lynn was the one who poisoned little man, but it's actually not Lynn, because Lynn is on the beach looking like confused and dazed after little man's brothers have beaten him up. And he's wondering as well, like, what happened? And then at this point, we see Covey in the hospital. She wakes up and they are calling her Eleanor. And this is how Eleanor was born. So that was episode 2. I hope y'all enjoyed this episode, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye, guys.